Imagine that a loved one has a terminal illness and no available treatment is effective. However, there is a new investigational drug being studied, but it may be years before it is available to the general public. If you are lucky, you may be able to get access to the experimental medication through a clinical trial. However, many patients are unable to join clinical trials because they only accept a limited number of patients, and you have to meet the criteria to be included in the study. Sadly, even some terminal patients may be too sick to participate in a clinical study. Welcome to this ethical dilemma in science, where we take a look at the intersection of science, ethics, and society. Today we're exploring the right to try law, a controversial policy that gives terminally ill patients a pathway to access experimental drugs outside of clinical trials. We'll break down the science, examine its impact on society, and challenge you with ethical dilemmas that have no easy answers. In this video, we will examine what is the 2018 Right to Try law, how does Right to Try compare to the FDA Expanded Access Program, what are the advantages and disadvantages of the Right to Try law. What is the Right to Try law? In 2018, the Right to Try Act was signed into U.S. federal law. This law allows patients with life-threatening illnesses who exhausted all approved treatment options and are ineligible for clinical trials to request access to investigational drugs that have completed Phase 1 safety testing, but are not yet approved by the FDA for general use. To get access to medications using the Right to Try law, there are several key requirements. The first is that the patient must be terminally ill and have no remaining approved treatment options. Second, the patient must be ineligible for ongoing clinical trials. Third, the investigational drug must have passed Phase 1 clinical trials and be in active development. The patient's physician must recommend the treatment. The pharmaceutical company must agree to provide the drug. And finally, the patient must give informed consent, indicating that they know that this is an experimental medication and that there is no guarantee that it will be useful in treating their given condition. Before the Right to Try Act, patients could seek access to experimental drugs through the Food and Drug Administration's, the FDA's, Expanded Access Program. This Expanded Access Program was often referred to as the Compassionate Use Program. Here's a comparison of the two pathways. Unlike the Right to Try Act, which doesn't require FDA approval or IRB review, IRB is an ethics review committee for human subjects, the Expanded Access Program that was available previously required both the FDA approval and the IRB review. Taking a look at the other requirements, they're very similar in that the patient must be in a terminal illness or a life-threatening situation in both of these circumstances, generally more towards the terminal illness for the Right to Try Act. The manufacturer must agree to provide the medication outside of the clinical trial. And then it's required that any adverse events be reported in the Expanded Access Program. So basically, if the medication causes problems for the patient that's taking it. So because the Right to Try Act doesn't require FDA approval and IRB approval, the Ethics Committee approval, patients potentially can get access to the medication much faster. And so taking a look at the advantages of the Right to Try program, the first is patient autonomy. The Right to Try program empowers patients with the help of their physicians to make their own treatment decisions, especially when no other options exist. As I mentioned previously, patients potentially get faster access to the medication because it doesn't require FDA review. It doesn't require an IRB ethics committee review, allowing for quicker treatment initiation. And then finally, the final advantage of the Right to Try Act is that it provides hope for the hopeless. It offers a last chance for patients who have exhausted all other avenues, all other possible treatments. It provides them with access to new, emerging, and developing treatments that are still experimental. But again, something that's experimental potentially is better than no option at all. Now, like any of the programs and any of these ethical dilemmas in science, there are going to be some disadvantages and concerns associated with the Right to Try Act. The first is the concept of informed consent. Informed consent is this idea that subjects in clinical trials and patients should be provided with accurate information in order to be able to make an informed consent, in order to make a decision based on their own personal conditions, based on the information that's available to them. Now, for terminally ill patients, they may be vulnerable to false hope, potentially compromising truly informed consent. If you have no other option, then maybe you're coerced into cooperating with the Right to Try Act and the right to try access to getting to the medication. Second, there are potential safety risks associated with it. The drugs eligible for the Right to Try Act have passed only the safety testing, the phase 1 clinical trials, and these are generally done on small groups of subjects. And so with additional studies, additional phases of clinical trials, they often find out about more safety information that may prove that this medication is unsafe and potentially ineffective at the treatment of the disease. It's argued that the lack of oversight is a disadvantage of the Right to Try Act. It's an advantage in that it can get access to the medication faster, but with no FDA, Food and Drug Administration, or Institutional Review Board ethics review, it means that there's less protection for the patients and less systemic reporting of adverse events. There's a potential financial burden associated with the Right to Try Act. Insurance is not required to cover the cost of the medication, and the manufacturer isn't necessarily going to give it away. And so some states will allow insurers to deny benefits if the patients are pursuing these experimental treatments. And so that limits who has access to pursuing medications under the Right to Try Act. And there's limited liability for the patients. Limited protection for the patients because there's limited liability for the physicians and the drug companies that are shielded from legal liability. And there's also no obligation for the companies to provide the drug that the patient is seeking under the Right to Try Act. The Right to Try law reflects a societal desire to give hope to the terminally ill, but it also raises questions about equity, safety, and the role of regulatory agencies. While the law is well-intentioned, very few patients have actually used this pathway as of 2025, as most companies and physicians still prefer the FDA's expanded access route. This gives rise to our ethical dilemmas in science for this week. Should insurance companies be required to cover the costs of experimental treatments under the Right to Try Act? Should pharmaceutical companies be compelled to provide investigational drugs to terminally ill patients, even if it may impact their research or business interests? Does bypassing FDA, Food and Drug Administration oversight put vulnerable patients at unnecessary risk, or does it respect their autonomy? Is it ethical to offer hope through unproven treatments, knowing that most will ultimately fail in later trials? And again, this is based on the fact that of the majority of drugs that go into clinical trial testing, only a very, very small minority of them actually are shown to be safe and effective. And then finally, how should society balance the desire for innovation and access with the need for safety and evidence-based medicine? The Right to Try law sits at the crossroads of science, ethics, and society. It offers hope, but it also raises profound questions about safety, fairness, and the responsibilities of all involved. As you reflect on today's topic, consider, what would you want for yourself or a loved one in this situation? And how should society respond to the needs of its most vulnerable members? If you found this discussion thought-provoking, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, and have a great week.